My parents told everyone I got into college through reservations, so I applied abroad in secret, got a full merit scholarship, and sent them the award speech where I left their names out entirely. I didn't grow up resenting my parents. Not at first. It took time. The kind of slow, creeping erosion you don't even realize is happening until one day you're standing in front of the ruins wondering when the cracks first started to show. My name's Anirudh. Everyone calls me Ani. I grew up in a small city in India where family status and academic rankings meant everything. My parents weren't bad people in the traditional sense. They weren't abusive. They didn't kick me out. They paid for school, but they were judgmental in that insidious, casual way. The kind where love always came with a quiet asterisk. We love you, but only when you're winning. I was a straight A student. I was the kind of kid who solved math problems for fun and read books during lunch breaks. I never rebelled, never partied, never did anything risky. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I racked up the gold stars, I'd finally get the kind of unconditional approval I saw other kids get just for existing. It never came. My family's caste background is complicated. Technically, we qualify for a reservation category under India's affirmative action system, and my parents were quick to slap that label on me. Not because we were struggling, we were solidly middle class, but because they saw it as a shortcut. They told relatives I'd get into college because of reservations, like it was some golden ticket handed to the undeserving. What they didn't tell people was that I never even intended to apply under that quota. What stung more than their assumptions was how they talked about it. They bragged to family friends like I was some political pawn who'd benefited from a broken system. I remember overhearing my uncle say, "He's smart, but let's be honest, he got in because of reservation." And my dad just chuckled and didn't correct him. That was the moment something in me hardened. Not because of the system, but because of the people who were supposed to believe in me the most. I tried to talk to them about it, once. My mother waved me off like I was being overly sensitive. "It's just how the world works," she said. "Take the opportunity and stop complaining." I didn't argue, but I also didn't forget. So I made a decision. Quietly, I started applying to colleges abroad. Not just any colleges, top universities in the US, UK, Singapore. I studied for the SATs at night when everyone else was asleep. I worked on my essays in secret, hiding drafts behind boring-looking files on our shared computer. I asked a teacher I trusted for a recommendation letter and swore her to silence. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want their help. I didn't want a single ounce of their credit if this worked. I wanted it to be mine, completely, undeniably mine. And then, the impossible happened. A full-ride scholarship. One of the top 10 schools in the US. Computer science major. They loved my essays. My test scores ranked in the 99th percentile. It was a merit-based award, and they made it very clear that I had earned it outright. I remember reading the email at 2:13 a.m. I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. I just sat there in silence, letting the validation wash over me like a wave I'd been waiting to break for years. The next morning, I printed out the letter and placed it in front of my parents at breakfast. They were confused. My dad blinked. "You applied where?" My mom squinted at the header. "This is America? When did you do this?" I told them everything in one breath. The prep, the essays, the sleepless nights, the scholarship. All without their help. All without a single shortcut. And then I said, I got in. Not because of reservation. Because I earned it. They didn't say anything at first. My dad looked uncomfortable, like someone had just challenged his worldview. My mom muttered something about it being unnecessary, that I already had options here. But it was too late. I had made up my mind. I was going. That day, I started packing in my head, even if the flight was still months away. In the coming weeks, the story changed in our extended family's WhatsApp group. My parents told everyone I'd applied on a whim and that they were so proud of me. But even in their version, they couldn't help slipping in a line about how I'd benefited from systems abroad being more welcoming to people like us. As if merit didn't exist in that narrative either. It didn't matter. I had something bigger in mind. The scholarship came with a stipend and a sponsored trip to a leadership summit for international scholars. They asked me to give a short speech, 3 minutes max, about my journey. And that's when the idea struck me. If they were going to rewrite my story, I'd write it myself. Publicly. Visibly. Unapologetically. I began writing the speech the next day. And I didn't include their names once. Writing that speech felt like therapy and revenge all at once. The prompt was simple: share your journey as an international scholar, but the subtext, for me, ran deep. I wasn't just going to tell them about test scores and essays. I wanted them to feel what it's like to carry your own name like baggage. To be told your success isn't yours, but a handout. I wanted them to know what it's like when the very people who raised you are also the ones who undermine you with a smile. So I wrote it honestly. No theatrics. No bitterness on the surface. Just calm, deliberate truth. I talked about what it was like to grow up in a house where silence was praise and expectations were laws. I described being the smart kid in school while constantly hearing whispers from adults. He's lucky to have quotas. Must be easy. I mentioned how people, teachers, neighbors, even cousins, assumed I didn't have to work as hard. That somehow, the system was tilted in my favor. I didn't mention my parents once. Not by name. Not even as my parents. I called them those closest to me. It was intentional. Every detail in that speech was built like a quiet reckoning. And at the end, I said this. There's something oddly powerful about being doubted quietly. It doesn't scream in your face. It lingers in rooms, in side eyes, in conversations you're not supposed to hear. But when your whole life is built under that fog, rising above it becomes your only option. I didn't come here to prove anyone wrong. I came to prove myself right. The applause when I finished felt distant, like it was happening in a different room. I was still standing in that childhood kitchen, hearing my mom say, "Don't make a scene," when I tried to push back against their assumptions. Still sitting at dinner while my dad told a relative I had reservation advantages without a hint of shame. Now I had made my scene, and I hadn't raised my voice once. When the recording of the summit was uploaded to YouTube, I sent them the link. No message, no emoji, just the URL. They opened it. My dad even commented, "Well spoken," but I knew what they were really thinking, because the calls stopped after that. Not completely, but enough to notice. Less checking in, more silence. I could feel the discomfort through the time zones. They couldn't find their names in the speech. Couldn't find the "we're so proud of you" moment they expected to be acknowledged for. I hadn't given it to them. And I wouldn't. College in the US was a culture shock at first. I'd never lived alone, never cooked for myself, never even used a dishwasher. But freedom has a way of making you brave. I built a routine. I started working in the campus innovation lab, researching ways to use AI to make educational access more equitable. Irony, I know. One day, while waiting for laundry, I got a message from a relative back in India. A screenshot. It was from my mom's Facebook post. She had uploaded a collage of my campus photos, me with professors, me at the summit, even me mid-speech, and wrote a caption dripping with fake pride. "Our son has made us proud through hard work and opportunity. We always knew he was special." No mention of the years she told people I had special treatment because of caste. No mention of the scholarship. And still, I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of laugh that tastes bitter in your throat. I replied to the relative who sent it with a single line. They've never read the speech, clearly. But they had. I know they had. There's something uniquely painful about having your struggle hijacked. To watch the very people who doubted you try to bask in the glow of the version of you they never believed in. It's not even about revenge. It's about reclaiming your narrative. Because if you don't, they'll write it for you. I started journaling regularly. Just for myself. Not for a speech, not for school, just to remember everything they tried to rewrite. I wrote down every snide comment, every dinner table dismissal, every time they said, "Be practical," when I dared to dream out loud. And I promised myself, I will not forget who I had to be to become this version of me. By the time sophomore year rolled around, things had shifted. I was working part-time at a startup run by one of my professors. I was getting paid to build actual software used in classrooms across the country. I was finally in spaces where nobody looked at me like I'd been handed anything. And one night, I got a call. It was my mom. I stared at the screen for a while before answering. I knew it wouldn't be casual. "Hi, Ani," she said, all cheerful. "We're planning to come to the US next summer. Thought we'd visit you. Maybe even meet your professors. They'll be so happy to know about your journey." Your journey. That word hung in the air like smoke. I kept my voice level. "That's nice. Just don't expect to be mentioned in any more speeches." There was silence on the line, long enough that I wondered if she hung up. But then she laughed nervously. "Don't be so dramatic." I didn't reply, because I wasn't being dramatic. I was being exact. By the time I turned 21, I was working on my first patent application. I say that not to brag, but because I still remember sitting at my childhood dining table while my dad said, "Engineering is fine, but you're not cut out for leadership roles." You're too quiet. Quiet. That word was practically tattooed on me growing up. Quiet when relatives dismissed my dreams. Quiet when my sister got new clothes and I was told, "You're a boy. Be simple." Quiet when I overheard my parents say, "Even if he doesn't make it big, at least he has the reservation card." They meant it as a safety net. I heard it as a ceiling. But things were different now. My project at the university's AI research lab had gotten attention. It wasn't anything flashy, just an adaptive learning tool to help students in underfunded schools, but it got picked up by a few nonprofits. One of them invited me to give a talk at a global education summit in London. It would be my second major speech. This time, I didn't send the link to my parents. I stopped including them in those moments, not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. You get tired of handing your joy to people who don't know how to hold it. But they found out anyway. Word always gets around. A week after the summit, my dad called. "You could have told us," he said, sounding almost hurt. "Your name is everywhere now." I kept it short. "I didn't think it mattered to you unless I used a shortcut to get there." That was the first time he didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "You're still our son." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, maybe you should have remembered that before you told everyone I cheated the system to get here. I started seeing a therapist through the university's wellness center after that. Talking through all the buried stuff, the subtle digs, the lack of praise, the pressure to represent an entire identity category in every success was like peeling off skin. Painful, but necessary. And with that clarity, I began doing something wild. I started forgiving them, not for their sake, for mine. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently, with boundaries, with clarity, with the understanding that sometimes people love you as best as they can, and that doesn't make it enough. Around that same time, my university offered me a mentorship opportunity, helping incoming international students navigate life in the U.S. housing, culture shock, homesickness, all of it. I jumped on it. Not because I had free time, I didn't, but because I knew exactly how lonely that first year felt. I didn't want anyone else to feel like they had to build a whole life in silence. One night, while hosting a welcome dinner for new students, a girl named Pooja pulled me aside. "I watched your speech from last year," she said, almost shyly. "The one where you talked about being doubted by the people closest to you." I nodded. She swallowed hard and said, "That's my life too." And in that moment, something clicked. This wasn't just about my family anymore. This was about every kid who ever sat at a table full of people who smiled at them while shredding their dreams piece by piece behind their backs. This was about legacy, not the one I was born into, but the one I was building. I started writing again, not just journals. I wrote essays, blog posts, even scripts for short videos. I began to frame the story not as revenge or even defiance, but reclamation. I wasn't a product of a broken system. I was a rebuttal to everyone who said the system gave me something I didn't earn. Meanwhile, back home, the silence from my parents turned into tentative pride. My dad started sending me articles about famous Indians abroad. My mom would text screenshots of LinkedIn profiles she thought I should connect with. They wanted to be part of the success story now. But they didn't ask about the work it took to get there. They didn't apologize for the years of reservation jokes, for the way they stripped me of my own agency every time they told someone I was lucky. One day, out of nowhere, I got a long message from my cousin Priya. "We were close once." She wrote, "I want to say I'm sorry. I laughed at those jokes too. I thought you were just lucky. But I see now how hard you've worked. I see it because I'm struggling through school and no one's handing me anything. You deserved better from all of us." It wasn't everything, but it was something. That message made me cry harder than I had in years. Because that's all I had wanted as a kid. Someone, anyone, to just say, "I see you. I believe you." And now, I did believe in me. I believed that silence doesn't have to be submission. That survival isn't about being the loudest voice. It's about not letting the quiet ones be erased. Next month, I was invited to speak at another summit. This one in Singapore. I was working on a new speech. Different tone. Same honesty. I wouldn't mention my parents in this one either, but I would talk about the power of being doubted. Because it made me who I am. The invitation came unexpectedly. My university was hosting a founders showcase, a kind of demo day where students with startups could present their ideas to alumni investors and guest VCs. My advisor nominated me, saying the work I was doing with adaptive learning systems had real legs. I didn't have a polished deck or a flashy pitch. Just my research, some promising metrics from the pilot schools, and a quiet fire in my chest I'd been stoking for years. I worked day and night refining it. 2 nights before the event, I got a text from my mom. Heard about your pitch event. We were thinking maybe we could visit? Just to support. Just watch. I stared at it for a while. The just to support stung more than I expected. It read like a cover story. A way to be present for the victory lap, now that the bruises of my climb had faded. Where was this support when they told relatives I'd made it because of reservations? When they handed my tuition fund to my cousin because he had better potential? Still, I replied, you can come, but don't expect a tour. This isn't a family visit. Blunt, maybe cold, but necessary. They came anyway. I saw them arrive just before the presentations began. My mom wore one of her silk saris, dressed for a wedding, not a student showcase. My dad wore sunglasses indoors, probably to keep from making eye contact with any of my professors who'd know the truth. They sat in the second row, not front, not back, right where the spotlight might find them without effort. I stepped on stage. I wasn't nervous about the crowd. I was nervous about seeing their faces while I talked. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because, for so long, I had trained myself to shrink in their presence, to fold my ambition into politeness. Not this time. I opened with a story, not about the tech, not about funding, but about a 16-year-old kid tutoring himself through a busted laptop in a noisy apartment in India, hoping no one would ask him why he wasn't using his reservation advantage to coast. The room was silent. I talked about the shame of being told you're only here because the system pushed you through. The isolation of success when it's constantly under suspicion. I didn't mention their names, but I felt their silence sitting in their chairs like second skins. After the pitch, there was a Q&A. A VC asked what kept me motivated through the hardest times. I looked right at my parents when I answered. Honestly, the idea that my story wasn't supposed to happen, that I wasn't supposed to be here, that somewhere, someone still thinks I didn't earn this. I wake up every day trying to prove that voice wrong. Applause. Nods. Even the guy from Forbes who was in the audience scribbled something down. Later, after the event, I went to the hallway to breathe. My mom approached me first. She looked proud, but off balance, like she didn't quite recognize me. You were amazing, she said, reaching for a hug. I let her. Briefly. You didn't have to make it so personal, my dad said, joining us. You could have talked more about the product. I turned to him. I did talk about the product. You just didn't hear it. He looked confused. I continued. The product is education, equity, accountability. Things you told me didn't matter as long as I had the right box checked. Silence. He tried again. We came to support you. No, I said, keeping my voice even. You came to be associated with the outcome, not the effort. They left shortly after. No dinner invite. No tour of my lab. And it felt okay. Not satisfying. Not victorious. Just okay. Like finally closing a book you kept rereading, hoping the ending would change. A week later, I got an email from one of the panelists. Subject line, interested in investing. She offered seed money, mentorship, and a full ride into an accelerator in San Francisco. I sat at my desk and just exhaled. Then I opened another tab and started drafting an email. Not to investors. Not to press. To my extended family. I wrote, to those who've watched my journey from the sidelines, some doubting, some cheering, most silent, I just wanted you to know. I didn't need shortcuts. I didn't need handouts. I needed space. And when I wasn't given that, I built my own. My parents aren't part of my startup. They're not on my team. They're not on my board. But they are in the acknowledgments under a section titled, Obstacles Disguised as Advice. I didn't send it. I just saved it. But it felt damn good to write. The next few months were a blur. Funding rounds, interviews, building a team, designing curriculum with teachers from both India and the US. And the day I launched the pilot platform across 3 international schools, I sent a single email, not to my parents, to my younger self. A Gmail account I'd created years ago just to write drafts of college essays and save scanned homework. I sent this. We did it. They said you needed a shortcut. Turns out, all you needed was distance and a damn good work ethic. I imagined him opening it. The skinny kid with glasses too big for his face and notebooks full of angry poetry. I think he would have smiled. 2 years into running my startup, I found myself back in India, sitting in a coffee shop across from a familiar stranger, my dad. He had messaged me the week before. Your aunt told us you were visiting. Can we talk? I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in energy. The man who once slammed fists on the dinner table and declared what was and wasn't possible for his quiet son now stirred his tea like it held answers. I wanted to say, he began, trailing off. We didn't understand back then. The things you wanted, the choices you made. It didn't fit our idea of success. I waited. We thought you'd burn out or come crawling back after failing. And when you didn't, we didn't know how to react. So we said things, wrong things. Still, I waited. My silence wasn't anger. It was years of learning that some apologies need space to breathe before they mean anything. Then he looked at me, eyes glassy, and added, "I'm sorry." I nodded. That was all I could give. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet decision you remake every time someone walks back into your life with the same voice that once wounded you. We talked a bit longer. He asked about my company. I gave the polished overview, the safe version. I didn't tell him that I still flinched every time someone implied my wins were a product of diversity optics. I didn't tell him that success sometimes felt like survival in a nicer outfit. And I definitely didn't tell him that I still heard his voice in my head some nights when I doubted myself. The one that once said, "Even if you get in, people will say you didn't earn it." That voice had become my benchmark. Every time I crossed it, I knew I'd grown. 3 months later, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at an international equity in education conference in Delhi. The kind of invite that usually goes to tenured professors or legacy philanthropists. I accepted. The theme was unwritten futures. I spent days crafting my speech, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I had too much to say. How do you fit years of being doubted, dismissed, and disrespected into 20 minutes without sounding bitter? How do you honor your own pain without making it your whole personality? The night before the speech, I sat alone in my hotel room and stared at the final line of my notes. I changed it 3 times. Then once more. The next morning, the hall was packed. Rows of policymakers, educators, founders, and a handful of young students who probably didn't know who I was and didn't need to. I wasn't there to impress them. I was there to remind them what belief, or the lack of it, can do to a person. I started the way I always did, with the story of the 16-year-old boy who was told he was only smart because of a system loophole, who spent years hiding achievements like they were secrets, who once cried into his pillow because a cousin repeated his father's joke. At least he's useful for checking the diversity box. I talked about building alone, learning in silence, choosing not to become cruel just because the world was. And then I said something I hadn't planned to. For a long time, I thought I wanted revenge. That success would be worth it if it hurt the people who doubted me. But over time, I realized my success doesn't belong to them. It's not a punishment. It's a reclamation of every version of me they tried to erase. The room was silent. Not the awkward kind, just reverent. I scanned the crowd and saw a couple of familiar faces, mentors, old classmates, even a teacher who once gave me a 10 tenths on a project, but scribbled, "Remember, you got this far because someone opened the door." They were all here, and I wasn't shrinking anymore. I ended my speech with the line I had finalized the night before. They said I got here because the door was open for me, but they never asked who built the door, who knocked, and who kept knocking when no one answered. I did. And now, I build doors for others. Standing ovation. Later that evening, after the panels and handshakes and interviews, I sat at the rooftop cafe of the venue with a glass of lime soda and my laptop. I opened my email and finally sent something I'd been holding on to. A video of the speech. No note, no subject line, just the link to my parents, to my relatives, to every teacher who ever told me to be realistic. 2 days later, my mom replied, just one line. We saw it. We cried. You are more than we ever imagined. And maybe that was enough, not to undo the past, but to soften its grip. I closed the laptop and watched the lights of the city blink below. Somewhere in the chaos of honking cars and fading fireworks, I let the last bit of that old ache go. I had carried it long enough. Now, I had rooms to light, doors to build, and kids to remind. You do not have to prove you deserve to be here. You already do.